Hi, I'm Rick Anthony, and welcome to the Someone You Should Know podcast, the podcast that focuses on musicians, authors, and interesting people. We like to say we're making a difference one artist at a time. So sit back, have a cold one, and get ready to meet someone you should know. A real treat today, especially for me, because not only is this lady a talented author, but she's a radio sister. We happen to have Turi Ryder. Turi, welcome aboard.
Thank you.
I am so happy to have you on because you lived my ultimate fantasy, girl. I got to tell you, you were on LS, the Big 89, and worked with such legends as Larry Lujak and Tommy Edwards and Fred Winston and John Landecker, Jeff Davis, Brant Miller, just to name a few. But I got to ask you, what are some of your fondest memories of working with those legends, especially Lujak?
Oh, Lujak was wonderful, but not in the way that you would normally think that he would be wonderful. In radio, I'm sorry to report, and you likely know from experience, that there are people who will be lovely to your face and not quite so lovely behind your back.
Absolutely.
But Lujak was the opposite. He was grouchy. May I swear on your podcast as a quote?
Sure, go ahead.
Larry's favorite word, a word I don't use all that often, but Larry's favorite word was fuck. So he would go, "Morning, Larry." He'd go, "Fuck you." So that was the morning conversation with Larry.
Yeah.
And he was grumpy, but how would you feel? You know, how many years had he been getting up at 2:30?
Yeah, that's just it.
Yeah, who can be pleasant at that point? But behind your back, Lujak would always do a great thing for you if he had the chance. So you had to be careful because sometimes the thing he thought was the great thing for you wasn't necessarily what you wanted. I almost ended up flying in a helicopter every day because
you want to do traffic reports?
Well, I don't, and I won't. And I love helicopter rides, but I'm not going to be the traffic helicopter. But I went up just to see the city with our premier traffic reporter, Don Nelson.
Don Nelson. I know that name well. Yeah.
Flew around with him, and Larry, of course, never missed an opportunity to have material. So he put me on the air, and I forget what I said, but he thought it was funny. And so he suggested, he went to management, talked about how great I'd been in the traffic helicopter. I was constantly having to fend off requests to do what was frequently considered to be a more acceptable job for girls.
Oh,
yeah, that would have been one of them. So yeah, to this day, it goes on.
I had a similar situation. I had a guy I was working at a station in St. Louis, and he said, "I owe you an apology." And I said, "How's that?" He said, "When I first met you about a year ago, I thought you were full of bullshit because you were just so bubbly and energetic and so outgoing and so wonderful to people. And here you are, a year later, you're exactly the same person. I thought you were a bunch of BS, but you're really a nice guy."
Nobody ever says that about me. But that's so nice. That really is. I cultivate friends who are nice. I figure it's like that test when the lab work you did in your 7th grade class where you had to take the acid and the base and mix them till it was neutral. I try to have nice friends so that they can get it back to neutral when people deal with it. Bring them shopping with me. Like I can be me and they can be them, and then people won't throw things at us. It's great.
I totally agree with you. What prompted you to follow a career in radio? Mine was because of listening to Lujak and Tommy Edwards and such when I was a teenager growing up in Northwest Indiana. How about you? What did you get into this weird world of radio?
All right, tell me, what do you think would be the worst possible reason to get into radio?
Falling in love with someone.
No, actually. You can always trade them in. What is says the woman who's been married to the same guy for almost 30 years. But what would, pick again. What's another really horrible?
Money, and fame.
No, there's a hope. There's a hope that you could maybe make some money. And I've been fortunate. I haven't made a huge pile of money, but owing to my amazing ability to live on like one of those, what are those, the bromiad plants, like that air plant you put on your refrigerator. I can live on that much money because I've had to most of my career. So I've been fortunate, and the union has also been good for me, and I've mostly been okay. But I will answer the question then. The worst reason I can think of to get into radio is because you love the music.
Oh God, no, not the music.
See there? See what okay. So I was a listener to all things arcane Now you can get this show on the internet, but there was this, and this is in the book. I used to sit under my parents' dining room table and listen to this obscure show that aired at midnight on Saturday night on our local classical station, and then was rebroadcast on Wednesday afternoons. That had weird comedy and folk music and British music and Irish music, and I just loved it. And then I moved from there to in high school WXRT, which you
Oh,
may
I know
know about.
XRT, you bet. Yeah,
Yeah, I
absolutely.
worked there for exactly 3 minutes. Um, Almost exactly that amount of time. Yeah.
Oh
And
my.
it was my second job, and I wasn't very good, but they thought that they would work with me. And then the competition went under the very next week, and they said, no, we're going to hire all these people with a following. And that made perfect sense. I tried to make myself cry during the exit interview, but I'm not good at it. I felt it though. I really did feel it. So yeah, that was the music.
Uh-huh.
And I had this fantasy that you could play the music that you loved. And I had exactly one job where that was true. That not counting the 3 minutes at XRT, there was this station in Elgin, Illinois called the
Okay.
Fox.
All right.
And I saved my music logbooks because nobody will ever believe that I worked in a place where you could play
Yeah.
Ministry and Emmylou Harris in the same hour. But you could if you knew what you were doing, you could do
If
it.
you did it
So yeah.
right, XRT does it all the time with their mix of music. Is just kind of floors me. It's like my wife is a huge fan of XRT, and I would kid her. She goes, well, you guys should be playing this. I was working at a rock station in LaPorte, Indiana, just at that
Uh-huh.
time, and she goes, you guys need to be playing that. I'm going, sweetheart, that doesn't really flow in our format as far as that goes because we're playing the real hard, the grunge stuff and the hard Metallica and AC/DC and such, and somehow Prince doesn't fit that mesh, babe. But it works for XRT. That's fine.
We played Prince before I think XRT played Prince in Elgin. We were amazing. We were like a college station with sponsors. It was wild. We
Very
loved it.
cool. Very cool. Now, when did you come to LS?
Okay, so I figured out that there was no money. It didn't take me all that long. Oh, here. I need to back up a minute.
Okay, go ahead.
It told me if I wanted to work at this alternative station, I would also have to sell airtime, which was
Oh,
a hilarious and catastrophic failure. But it gave me um, an appreciation for where the money comes from. It also made me appreciate how much money I wasn't making. So I figured out that and I wanted insurance. I don't know why. I'm old-fashioned Midwestern girl, and I was worried that if anything happened to me, my parents would mortgage their home. I needn't have worried. They probably would have just let me, lie out on the freeway, but I thought that they would. So I started applying because I like real country music. I mean, I like George Jones. I was country when country wasn't cool. I
uh-huh.
liked John Hyatt. I liked John Prine, and I was kind of raised in that folky scene that was on the Northwestern campus. They had a coffee house I would go to. So I thought, okay, well, I'll work in country radio. And there were two country stations, and I applied to both of them. And one of them told me if I wanted to be a success on the radio, I should move to, I believe he said Toledo, Ohio.
What?
And the other, no, it wasn't very good. And it was
No.
true.
Uh-huh.
To really be worthy of a full-time country job,
All
I
right.
suppose Toledo, Ohio had its charms. But the other guy said, and again, and I would encourage anyone who listens to your podcast, if you want to be on the radio and someplace doesn't respond or tell you no, certain amount is talent, certain amount is luck, and certain amount is being there when the regular guy quits.
Absolutely. How true is that? Oh
So
my.
it happened that they were a little desperate, and I would
Yeah.
show up. I wouldn't just send the tape. This was my other favorite. This is going to be like a how to get into radio.
Uh-huh.
But my favorite line was, "Well, I'm going to be in the neighborhood. Why don't I just drop off the tape?" And so then I could see the place and they could see that I was serious and maybe I could get an interview, which they would never have given me just from listening to the tape because there were zillions of tapes. And I still try to communicate this to my kids. They're like, well, the application's all online. I'm like, yeah, but you're not. So go in. So I went in and I remember the GM, Chuck Artigue. I don't know I haven't thought of that name in years. And I handed off my tape and they listened and handed it to the PD. And they hired me they were going to give me one weekend shift, I think, or maybe two.
Mhm.
And I said, because this was a union and it paid better and I had insurance, I said, if you can guarantee me 3 weekend shifts and I'll come in on a short turnaround. I'll do it. If you can guarantee me 3 weekend shifts, I will make myself totally available for any other fill-in that you have. And they said, okay. So I quit my job that I was commuting 100 miles to each day, and I took these 3 weekend shifts, and that's how I ended up being overnights on the country station.
Yes.
But the place was really not a healthy place to work. And I'm not going to go into it in great detail. I do talk about it in the book, but here's what I'll say about that. I got someone bought the book and read it and messaged me, someone who had worked there after I did. And this is what she said. I grew up in an alcoholic and abusive household. And until I read your book that described this place, I never understood that this was actually abuse. So it wasn't a healthy situation, but it did give me full-time radio work, and it gave me entree into Chicago. So when WLS had an opening and I had just been sacked from this other country station, I did my usual thing. I went over there with my tape and dropped it off and didn't see the person. But people reported that I'd been in who had heard me on the station across town, and I came in, and I wasn't very good at all. And I'd never done any top 40.
Uh-huh.
But the program director, Steve Casey, said something later. Do you want to hear this story too?
Sure, go ahead. This was after Garen, right?
Garen was general manager.
Oh.
So he was still there, but he was not programming. And the air staff it was Lou Jack, Little Tommy, and it was Jeff Davis at night, and Fred Winston, and Landecker wasn't back yet. Brent Miller was on. They're amazing talents, all these guys.
Exactly,
it's like the Harvard of radio. So a few months after I started working there, I walked by my boss's office, and you'll know because you're an air personality what a dish pack is.
Oh, yeah,
dish
absolutely.
Pack?
Mm-hmm.
Dish packs, for those who do not know, are these big, tall cartons that moving companies pack your dishes in.
Mm-hmm.
So they don't pack them close together. They're giant. And if you fill them full of stuff, you will break your limbs trying to lift them. But if you just have, a tea set in there, it works. So he had the maintenance people loading a dish pack onto one of those dollies outside the door of his office. And I said, "Are you looking to replace me?" And he said, "No." He said, "These are the people who didn't get your job."
Oh, my.
And I said, do you have a moment? And he said, in his beautiful radio voice, "Sure I do. Come on in." So I said, can you just tell me, now that you've hired me, why did you hire me?
Mm-hmm.
You've got all these people who've done all this top 40 radio in all these different markets. Why me? And he said, "Well, when I talked to you on your tape, it was clear that you had something to say. And I would rather have someone with something to say and teach them how to say it than someone who's really good at saying absolutely nothing."
Oh, that's beautiful.
That's the story.
There you go. Awesome. Very cool.
Long story, but there you are.
You and I have both had our share of working overnights. Now, yours is a lot different from mine because where you worked at, it reached 38 states. That had to be a bit of a thrill.
It did.
One of your favorite stories of working the overnighters.
Oh, boy. Well, some were good and some were not as good.
I know. I've talked many people off of ledges in my time.
I wish that I'd had the opportunity to do that nice thing. Instead, I ended up spending a lot of time with the police.
Oh, dear God.
Well, no, it wasn't. I mean, I'm exaggerating a little. But the thing about being on the radio at night is it's deeply personal, as you know, because oftentimes people have the radio on for company because they're working or they can't sleep or something's wrong. Or something, it's a world of people who don't have a lot of other people for company typically. I mean, unless you work in a hospital emergency room in a big city, there's not a lot going on from 2 a.m. to 5:30 a.m. for most people, most places. So what do you get? A lot of prisoners. A lot of prisoners.
You have a call from such and such penal institute. Will you take this collect call?
I wish I could. They didn't call. They wrote, and they wrote really scary things, thinking I would like them. I every year on, I think it was Valentine's Day, And we were in easy earshot of the maximum security federal prison in Marion, Illinois. I'm
There
sure
you
you
go.
know
Yeah,
of it.
absolutely. Yes.
I would get a card showing me in sort of bondage gear, cradling whatever high-powered assault rifle was the flavor du jour,
Uh,
and it was always signed "Love the Men at the Max." That was one,
I
and
love
then
that.
I love that too. Yeah, it was so much. And then, but the scarier people are the people who imagine that they have a personal romantic
Absolutely.
relationship
Yeah.
with you.
Yeah. The
And I'm
stalkers.
sure
Hmm.
this has happened to you.
Yep.
Tell me about what happened to you.
Well, there was a girl that used to call me, and she actually used to tell the other jocks that we were going out together. And as far as does Rick's wife know about this particular thing? Is oh yeah, we were at this wedding together. We were at the wedding reception together, and it got to a point where we were having a performance. It was one of those outdoor concert type thing, and she shows up there looking for me. And the
Huh.
engineer, our buddy Timmy Helms, little stubby guy, Timmy Helms, goes, "Hey Rick, there's a fan here that wants to talk to you." And I look around the corner, going, "Oh dear God, it's my stalker." He said, "Let me handle it. Let me handle it." So he goes up and he says, "Okay, just want to let you know that Rick's wife is here, and if she sees you talking to him, she will have you in a in a figure four leg lock in a matter of moments." So she started crying and left.
Aw.
Yeah, but she,
Yeah,
yeah,
good
she,
for your wife.
yeah,
10 points for your wife.
there's-
I have to say that you asked about Lou Jack. That was another good thing he did for me once. There was a guy who imagined that we had a deeply personal relationship with a child involved, or
oh
would
dear
be
Lord.
who kept talking about our star child. I had no flipping clue at all, no clue what he meant by this, but I do know that everything he sent me, which immediately went to the garbage, smelled like mildew. It was really
Oh
scary.
no.
And he obviously lived in some basement somewhere where it was very damp. And one day, Lou Jack comes in and he says, there's a guy. I drove at that time a soft top Jeep Renegade,
Yeah,
like
okay.
CJ7, the kind that with giant snow tracker tires on it, because I had to go to work before the streets were plowed. And I will quote Lou Jack again. That your Jeep Ryder? Oh yes, there it is. Ugliest fucking thing I've ever seen. So he comes in and he says, "Ryder," which is what he called me,
Yeah.
Ryder. Yes, Larry. Somebody's sitting in your Jeep.
Oh no.
And I said, "Oh, okay." And I knew who this was. So Larry made sure that he called the cops and he made sure that I got into the Jeep safely. And he was
Oh
very
yeah.
chivalrous. If I had to pick one word for my experience with Larry, he was chivalrous. The old school,
Yeah.
really, really chivalrous. And there's a story in the book where I had to dress in something very hookerish for a
Risque. Yeah.
shoot.
Very risque. Yeah. Mhm.
And because the guys got to be, this is how it was. The guys got to be themselves, and I got to play the secretary in spike heel boots. Thank you. And I had to fight for that. So Larry was very worried about me walking back from this shoot looking like that. And he walked me back skeptically looking at me. I mean, I dressed like all the guys to come to work. I thought, well, if they
Mhm.
wear flannel shirts, jeans, and cowboy boots, then that's what I'm going to wear too. And he had never seen me in a tiny little mini skirt with fishnet stockings and high heels and none of that and the makeup. And he's like, "You're gonna be all right." And I looked at him and I opened up my purse. I said, "See this washcloth? It all comes off."
Oh
It's like
gosh.
you could see him exhale. So because I really was tarted up. I mean, this was the 80s. I had eye shadow. It looked like I looked like a battery victim is really what I looked like.
Was
But it
this
was
the shoot for the Bigfoot video?
yes.
Yeah, I had someone actually comment about that. Just ask her about the Bigfoot video, and
Who told you to ask me about that?
just another jock friend of
Oh,
mine. Yeah, I just
I
happened to
bet they
mention
read
it.
the book. It's
Yeah,
in there. Yeah. Okay. So was that your question? Was the
no,
stalkers? Okay,
yeah,
you want more people
oh,
listening at night? I could tell you more. I had somebody call who was combining peas, so that was
oh,
nice.
there you go.
Yeah, lots of cops.
I could
And
imagine.
a lot of people who wanted to be in radio, and most of them were very polite and very um just interesting, kind, lovely, aspiring radio people. And I kind of felt like I'd a little bit fallen into this by luck, although that really wasn't true. By then I had well paid my dues, but I sort of felt extra lucky remembering that dish pack. So if I had time, I would always talk with anyone who called and wanted to know my quirky story. But there was one woman who called, I remember distinctly. I don't know who she was. I think that I could do your job. I want to do your job. How do I get your job? And she said this in 6 or 7 ways, 6 or 7 times. And
Uh-huh.
I took a moment. So, because I think I'm just as good as you, she actually said, and I
Well,
could do your job, maybe better than. And I said, clearly self-confidence is not a problem for you.
hmm.
So the rest is just applying. Good luck. Goodbye.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So lots of people listened at night. And I dated a guy who was I'm not going to name names, but a semi-famous LA, well, pretty famous LA guy. And he lived in Santa Monica and he could listen to the show from the end of the Santa Monica Pier. So that was cool.
Well, that blows me away because it had a huge reach, a huge downstate cume and everything. It was phenomenal. Most of course, I worked on all the FM stations, and it was it was especially in Denver. Hey, you lose it right there at the Front Range.
Yeah.
It'll go all the way to
Yeah.
Kansas, but it won't go anywhere further west than the Front Range. Now, the book we've been talking about is called "She Said What: A Life on the Air." It's published by Tortoise Books. Came out in 2019. I have been asked by my wife. Now, I had my late wife was with me most of my radio career. My wife of just a year or so has heard me talk about all these stories. I talked to that musician, or I talked to that person on TV, or that particular actor, that particular actress. And she says, "You got to write a book." And I said, "No, I don't write a book." She says, "Well, you got to do a podcast." This show is actually a reboot of a national show I had for the All Star Radio Network back in the 1990s.
Ah,
And yours is co-hosted by Marcy Persky, right?
yes.
Tell me,
Yes.
tell me about Marcy.
Well, I'm happy to tell you about Marcy because it ties right back to my weird overnight radio career.
Okay.
One night, at WLS was in the Stone Container Building.
Stone
You will
Container
remember
Building,
this from
right above
John.
right above
Yes.
the downtown Burger King.
That's right. The Stone Container Building was at
Absolutely.
the corner of Wacker Drive and Michigan Avenue.
Yeah.
Still is there. Station's not there, but
Mhm.
the building is there. And Wacker Drive makes a curve around the river. And I walked out of work one morning, 5:45, and it's not light yet. There is a woman standing looking very confused next to a totally annihilated car.
Okay, this is a
And
good story. Go ahead.
I said, "Are you all right?" She said, "Yeah, I was at work. I work upstairs at UPI. That's United Press International.
International, yeah.
For they're no longer what they were. And I'm the Midwest editor at night, and I came down, and this is what's left of my car." So I said, "Well, I can't help you get it towed, but let me give you a ride home. Where do you live?" And we stopped and had breakfast first, and that was how I met Marcy. And Marcy has done just about like you. She's done everything. She has been on the air. She hosted a morning drive show. She's from Michigan and sounds it, which I love. And she's written columns. She wrote rock reviews. She wrote theater reviews. She's worked sports. She's a big sports fan.
Okay.
Her one of her sons is named Jordan Michael. That should tell
Oh,
you
jeez.
something. And we've maintained a friendship, even though the ways that we like to live are completely different. I live in Chicago proper. She lives a few miles from the mouth of the Grand Canyon.
Oh, wow.
So
Okay. That's
on a
great.
property with goats and
Nice.
every wandering bobcats and strange things happening in the middle of the night. So she's perfect because she cracks me up. And I mean, the other day she decided that she would like to get a phone sex job because it's something she could do at home to make money. But then she said, "But I sound like Marge Simpson, so I don't think there are too many people looking for."
I don't know. There's a lot of kink out there. That might be something else. Have sex
I
with a
said, "These
Simpson.
days there's porn. Just name 5 random objects in your house right now, and somebody's got a YouTube channel that you can pay to see porn with
A Duff,
random object from your house." It's a little
Duff
scary.
beer can.
I'm sure. I've no doubt.
Oh, dear
I'm
God.
telling you, there is just nothing. Look around your room there. I see that you're in a beautifully appointed room.
Yes, yes, yes.
Pick 5 things, and it's like Mad Libs, but for porn.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
It's a shame.
there you go.
It's a shame what goes on nowadays. Now, you've made the transition from music radio to talk radio and such, and you're on WCPT 820 from time to time. Can you tell us a little bit about the gig there?
Sure. I had started when I started doing talk, that was Portland, Oregon. And I called myself your morning man because there were no women doing morning drive
Uh-huh.
in any of the major markets. And I was new to the format, but it was a consultant named Valerie Geller who encouraged me to try talk radio because top 40 radio was losing its personality. I'm sure you can speak to this.
All right, absolutely.
And I had worked at a personality hot AC station where I could be my personality self, but my boss got moved up in the company and they hired somebody who wanted me to sound like the women along the coast. And I wasn't really interested in sounding like the women along the coast. So I basically told him he could blow it out his ear nicely. But the last top 40 station I'd worked at, there was no personality. In fact, their big promotion was, we're going to do 0 jock hours, 0 talk hours. And I got fired by saying, so you're asking us to promote the fact that we have the best air talent in America, but we're not going to say anything.
Right, exactly.
That's what you want. And then the time I knew there was no turning back, they had if you're not in radio, I have to explain this. There are these jingles. Those are the things that say fabulous radio, right? Whatever it is, right? And and at the beginning, sometimes there's a little shred of music where the jock says something, and then you hear fabulous radio, right? So we got a big memo. The new music jingles are out, and they are 22 seconds long. They're 25 seconds long, and 22 seconds is announcer and singing. Feel free to ad-lib the remaining time. 3 seconds. And I just thought, and now I will swear. All right, everybody, protect your ears. This is utterly fucked up. I thought to myself, that's what this is. This is just, I'm not doing this. And I went on some kind of a rage and a rant. And Valerie Geller said, you should be doing talk radio. And I grew up, and I'm sure you listened to WGN in Chicago.
Exactly, yeah.
And when we grew up, if you had trouble sleeping during the day, WGN was perfect for that. I was insulted. I was like, and a pair of pantyhose for your mom. Well, we've got some recipes for you. Joe and Bob are cooking something in the kitchen. What's in the kitchen, Joe? It was,
or either that or
so bad.
I think we'll do some farm reports too to go along with that.
I thought those were more interesting. At least they had concrete information. I was intrigued by the idea of cattle futures, and I didn't know what I didn't think cattle had a particularly long or interesting future, but
that's true.
Talked about them a lot. So I did not. That was what I thought talk radio was, and I did not wish to do that.
Right.
So I resisted until I was desperate. And Valerie said, let me connect you with the consultant of this new talk station in Portland.
Okay.
And the first thing that happened was, I haven't mentioned my fictitious resume, have I?
No. Let's talk about that. We got about 8 minutes left. So let's
okay. So when you get started, you're in this catch-22. You can't get a job unless you haven't had a job, and you can't get a job and you had a job. And so I made up a bunch of radio stations. They were real radio stations. I looked them up in something called the standard rate and spot buying data service, something that I thought were so obscure nobody would have made up working at them in Rantoul, Illinois, for example. Sorry, Rantoul, Illinois listeners. And when I went to interview in Portland, they asked me how I got my job in radio. And I said, well, I went to the library, looked up stations, made up a whole bunch of stuff, and I could read, which was helpful, and read copy, which was helpful. And I'd been on my high school radio station, which was helpful. And every time I got a real job, I crossed out one of the fake jobs. And I triumphantly ended my answer with, and now my resume is all real. And the general manager looked at me with complete horror. He was repelled, disgusted, upset. And I will say this, I should have known, because when I had already heard that at a big company dinner, he was excited about white sheet cake with white frosting. So I should have known. Should have known. No flavor to this guy. Don't do anything spicy around him. White cake, white frosting. That was what I should have made up. I should have lied instead of telling the truth about my lies. Jeez. So they said, no, thank you. And then the consultant said, well, if you don't hire her, I'm not consulting the project. So then they hired me. And then shortly after that, they were filled with regret because I did not know how to behave. And I did terrible things like wrecked the Christmas promotion for them.
Oh, no. But
Yeah, I
there's so
did.
many fun things about radio, though. But the thing is, the way things have gotten tarnished nowadays because of corporations taking over and basically diluting the talent pool. And it's been so difficult nowadays. But it's wonderful to talk to individuals like you, who I could talk to for another hour, but we've got about another 6 minutes left as far as time-wise. Let's get to links to your material, to your podcast, to your book and such. Can you give us some links to where everyone can find more about Turi Ryder?
Well, sure. I mean, I'll send them to you. The easiest thing to do is just Google me in any context. You can Google, there's TuriRyder.com. That'll work. If you Google Turi Ryder podcast, that will get you to, and any podcast page, any of them, Apple or LinkedIn, they'll all show you. If you Google, don't just put in "she said what," or you'll get, I believe, some minister and possibly porn. I don't know. But the book is that you do need the title for. It's "She Said What? A Life on the Air," and it's from Tortoise Books. And I am grateful that I have a publisher here in Chicago who's just wonderful to me. And soon the audiobook will be done.
Oh, wonderful.
So for those of you with long commutes or great exercise routines and you want it in your ear, I will put it in your ear very shortly. So there's that.
Wonderful.
Is that fast enough of an answer?
That's beautiful. Beautiful. As a
Oh,
matter
there
of fact,
you go.
we're going to repeat those down in the show notes. So anyone who's missed, we'll go ahead and put those in the show notes. Turi, we've got a couple minutes left. Let's go ahead and talk about real quickly.
Yes.
This section we do called Tales from the Road. This is particularly the worst road stories anyone's ever had. Your worst remote. You got about 4 minutes. Tell me your worst remote story.
So remember I told you about that abusive country station?
Yes.
Yes, and they used to do free beer night at these redneck country bars, and
nice.
I love rednecks.
Oh,
I am a fan of rednecks. They tend to be, good old boys. They'll help you change your tire if it's flat at the side of the road. But in this case, with free beer, it was not a good combination to send a then 20-something petite kid in a station t-shirt in there with free beer. And our evening guy, Ken Cocker, would often come and rescue me. He had played pro baseball and he was huge, and he would show up, drink a free beer, see me at the point of being carried out by a bunch of guys ready to head to their pickup truck, and he would intervene and make them put me down. So that was a series of horrible things I hope never to have to do again, was those free beer nights for this country station.
Yeah.
That was a bad one. And this is a WLS story, and God love John Guerin. He's a wonderful, wonderful man. But this was the first Taste of Chicago, I think it might have been. And they had huge concerts with big name bands. And he wanted me to go on after the band went off to thank everybody for coming. Now, what do a bunch of drunken for some reason, sun-tortured, pizza wolfing rock and roll fans want to hear after their favorite band has just left the stage? Not me.
Yes.
Not me. All they wanted was their band to come back, do another encore. And there I am. Yeah. And I'm lucky I got out of there. God bless the Chicago Police Department. I just love them. So yeah, that was not fun. I have more where those came from, but I think those are the two. I think that's the bookend there.
That is actually in the book. So I want you to go ahead and buy a couple hundred copies of the book. Everyone's going to love it in your family. It is called She Said What? A Life on the Air, published by Tortoise Books. The link is going to be down in the show notes. Buy yourself a bunch of copies. I know I am. I've already got mine, so I am looking forward to spending a little more time delving through that, because I got Tommy's book, I've got Lou Jack's book, I think I even got Jack Brickhouse's book. So I love those great stories of time.
I will buy your book. I will buy your book when it comes out. Well, I think your wife is right.
I think just listen to the podcast. I'll link your podcast. All I ask is that you share on your podcast and you talked on this podcast. That's all.
I will. And on all the socials, because that's where love is now, on your social media.
Absolutely.
That's where love can be found.
Turi, I could have talked to you for another hour and a half or something like that, but time is a little short here. I'm going to let you go. You have yourself a wonderful day. My very best to you in your healing process with your arm, and my very best to Marcy and your podcast. Everyone be sure to check out her podcast called She Said What, with co-host Marcy Persky. Turi Ryder, it's been an absolute treat to have you on the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Hi, this is Rick Anthony, thanking you again for listening to this episode of Someone You Should Know. Now, if you're an aspiring musician or an established musician that's looking for a little exposure, I invite you to drop us a line at someoneyoushouldknowpodcast@gmail.com. That's someoneyoushouldknowpodcast@gmail.com. Also, I invite you to tell a friend about the Someone You Should Know podcast. I thank you for tuning in this time, and I invite you to check us out next time on the Someone You Should Know podcast, because you never know who's going to show up. Until next time, remember, God loves you, and so do I.